Hello and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm Kevin Castley. Thank you for being here tonight, everybody. We have a big panel, a full house lined up tonight. We have joining us Anthony of East to be Sought, Anthony Roberto, Henry of an American Empire, Ray Murasame, as well as Diego de Pedo. This is going to be a very important stream. We're going to be discussing the revelations that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, had intelligence indicated to him in a briefing that the Russians were placing and offering a bounty on essentially on the lives of U.S. soldiers, that anybody that would kill them in Afghanistan would receive financial reward. Donald Trump was made aware of this, and this was back in March, and he has since done nothing to indicate in any way that he was retaliating or getting tough on Russia. He has done absolutely nothing. And earlier this evening, Henry of American Madhouse, he had done a stream, and I had watched some parts of it, and Henry had mentioned that essentially there were only two possibilities here for what could have happened in terms of Trump's response. Either during that briefing, Trump just simply did not pay attention, which we know is part of his character, to be inattentive and incurious, and he just, it went over his head. Or, and I believe, as well as Henry indicated, that he believes that the far more likely explanation is that he understood the intelligence that was presented to him, at least on a basic level, and didn't care. And that is damning. That is utterly damning, that the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, of the largest military in the world in terms of power, as well as the preeminent superpower in the world, that the elected president would essentially care so little for the lives of those serving his country, that when he is informed that a rival power is offering money for the skulls of dead Americans, that he would simply brush it off and go back and say, I want to watch Tucker Carlson, essentially. It is utterly pathetic. The Lincoln Project, which is comprised of essentially very concerned, disillusioned Republicans that are dissatisfied, as well as former Republicans that are dissatisfied with the trajectory that Donald Trump has led the Republican Party down into what I've termed the era of cringe, essentially, that they have released an ad today out, and it's simply called Bounty. And we're going to take a look at it right here, and then we will go to the panel. So again, thank you for everybody. We got 9 people here already, so thank you for being with us tonight. Here's the ad. This is from the Lincoln Project.
In the last year, flag-draped coffins have returned from Afghanistan. Now we know Vladimir Putin pays a bounty for the murder of American soldiers. Donald Trump knows too, and does nothing. Putin pays the Taliban cash to slaughter our men and women in uniform. And Trump is silent, weak, controlled. Instead of condemnation, he insists Russia be treated as our equal. Instead of retaliation, he invites Putin to America. When Trump tells you he stands by the troops, he's right. Just not our troops.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So there you have it. That's the new ad out today from the Lincoln Project. And with that, we will go to the panel. As I mentioned, we have a full house here tonight. The maximum allowed through StreamYard, which is the service that's powering the stream this evening. Again, thank you to everybody for coming on. We will begin with opening remarks, and we will begin in the order that we have here, going clockwise. We'll start with Anthony of East to be Sought. Thanks for coming on.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Vistibison. I'm a freelance writer for the Jerusalem Post, Aria Magazine, and The Region. I focus on the MENA region, specifically Syria conflict, as well as minority rights, including the Kurds. You can find me at Stoic Viper, and my website is philosophyismagic.com. I just want to say that the video that you played is quite powerful because it does highlight essentially that the President of the United States of America is not putting the interests of his troops first, but rather the interests of a foreign nation before his own. And I think that is quite damning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had mentioned to you before we went on air this evening, I said, it was fantastically unbelievable in the technical sense of it, that if you were to go back 4 years, even perhaps 3 years, definitely 8 years, and say, at some point, not too long down the road, the American president isn't going to care that his own troops are being killed, and the Russians are offering a bounty for it, and he doesn't care. That sounds like fake news. You'd say that has to be fake news, except it's legitimate. It's backed up by the claims of some very high level figures in the Republican Party that don't have really any interest to go against Trump here, but this is the reality of the situation. Additionally, the reason why I'm inclined to believe that his lack of concern wasn't simply that he wasn't paying attention in the briefing, but rather that it was a lack of care, was essentially, it's twofold. The first is, somebody would have mentioned it a second time or a third time and said, "Hey, Mr. President, are you going to do something about this? Do you remember this back then?" And he could have been like, "Oh, I don't remember that." And then they explain it to him. So there were many opportunities since March that he would have been made aware of this. Second, for the reason why I think he doesn't care, is that this is simply another point of data in a long, long chart of data points indicating not only his essentially sympathies for the Russian state, but also his financial servitude towards them. I call him Big Debt Don. His own son admitted that, this was several years before he ran for president, his own son admitted in a golf magazine that the Russians were the ones behind the financing for all the new golf courses that he was building. So this was in the wake of the 6 bankruptcies over several decades. The only creditors he could find were in Russia, Alpha Bank, Spare Bank, etc. Which, by the way, if you're going to be the head of one of those banks, you don't get to be in that position without Putin's favor. So it might as well just be, it is for all intents and purposes, the Russian state to whom he owes money, big money. He most likely, in my assessment, probably has a negative net worth, but that's debatable. The point is that he has every interest to mitigate and apologize and rationalize the actions of America's preeminent rival in the world. And with that, I mean, there's an argument as well to be made that it's not just that he doesn't care, that he may have a more malfeasant view of it and say, well, we are the bad guys. They shouldn't be over there. They deserved it. That sort of attitude. So again, those are my thoughts there. But we'll go to Henry now.
Oh, hi, I'm Henry. I'm not really sure what everyone's so upset about. It's not exactly like he's done nothing. He's done plenty. I think it was like a month ago. I guess he's known about this for 3 months. And like a month ago, he was trying to get Russia back into the G7 summit. So he did that. True. He's been pretty friendly with Russia throughout this and throughout his administration. He invited Putin to America. He's been doing plenty of shit to warm up to his best friend. But, it's honestly, it's kind of sad. And so it's really worse than him doing nothing, actually. If he'd been doing nothing, that would be bad enough. But it's not just that he's like ignoring this or doing nothing. He's like actively sucking up to the guy that did this to us and actively being friendly with him and trying to bolster our relations with that nation. Because for some reason, I don't know why he thinks it's like a valuable relationship for us to have, more valuable than the relationship with our allies. It's like the most ass backward, I don't know, strategy that I could possibly imagine, where it's just like our allies should be treated like shit, and our enemies who are paying to get our soldiers killed should be treated like guests, and we should be trying to do things to aid them and be friendly with them. So it's really a lot worse than doing nothing, in my view.
That's such a good point. That's such a good point. It's worse than nothing. It's actively aiding them. It's pathetic. So with that, we're going to go to Anthony Roberto. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, what's up? I'm Anthony Roberto. I'm on Twitter, and I'll be live streaming soon. Anyways, yeah. So when it comes to like the whole like Trump thing, I guess like it's not like a huge surprise, like in the whole like grand scheme of things, though, because it's like we've seen Trump be really weak on Russia in multiple ways. You know, whether it be signing off on sanctions or inviting him back into the G7, like what Henry said, or just in like a variety of other ways where, you know, Russia's had a footprint and Trump has done little to nothing. And, you know, this is just another case of that, of, I guess, the larger point is that it's like, you know, this is definitely a really big problem. The fact that like he knew about this and then like not much has really been done. I haven't heard of any new sanctions being placed, and I haven't heard anything right now. So it's definitely going to be really strange to see, I guess, what's going to come out of the administration, because I know like people like Pompeo at least like talk tough on Russia, but like not a whole lot's been done. So this is definitely really sad, especially considering the fact that like I've had a couple family members who served in Afghanistan, and you know this is definitely really really bad. You know, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, they point out in that video, the Lincoln Project does, that there are 20 families, you know, that are mourning over soldiers that were lost, and the Russians paid, you know, for them to be killed. It's gross. And one point that I thought of is this revelation had been highlighted, was how our opponents will often use the argument that, well, no, Russia's our friend. We have so much common interests with Russia. Russia also is a victim of terrorism and all this sort of stuff that they argue, and that we just need to get along with them, and that we should be the ones reaching out to them to make amends and everything. And I think that it's stories like this that make it very clear, crystal clear, brutally clear, that they are not our friend. They are our rival. They are our enemy. They are the enemy of the Western world. They are the enemy of the liberal order. And they are the enemy of the United States. And Putin knows this. And it is very unfortunate and disappointing that the President of the United States fails to recognize that. I mean, he looks at the snake of Putin the way that a domesticated rabbit would view a snake if just all of a sudden placed in contact. It would go up and try to sniff the snake, not knowing, not basically being deprived of any instincts that come from exposure to the wild. This is Donald Trump. He has no idea how to handle himself in the anarchy of the international condition. And he's out there, you know, at a minimum, the easiest, the most generous characterization that we could offer him is that he's naive, that he's incurious, that he's gullible, and that he fails to grasp the consequences of what's going on. The more likely and less generous explanation is that he's on their side. So, you know, I mean, that can manifest itself in different ways. I think owing them money, that definitely goes a long way to make him not care too much if American soldiers are killed and it's the Russians sponsoring their deaths. I mean, Henry pointed out there, welcome them back in, tried to welcome them back in to the G7, make it the G8 again. Pathetic. Pathetic, without any preconditions, without them leaving Crimea, for example. So we'll go to Ray Murasame now. Thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I'll just do my introduction. But basically, my name is Ray Murasame, and I'm a cultural commentator and political analyst from the perspective of the third worldism tendency. And I'm an advocate of post-colonial feminism and Pan-Asianism. I run a live stream channel known as Stage 501, and the website is actually stage501.com. My live streams focus on current events. I'm always willing to talk to people from all sides of the political spectrum. I'm also a systems analyst working for a defense contractor. So I'm happy you chose to bring me on for this particular stream because it's kind of like right in my ballpark. For me, this whole situation in Afghanistan is particularly grave from my perspective because the Taliban is a threat to every Central Asian minority group in Afghanistan and to every woman who lives there. Afghanistan can never progress and grow so long as the Taliban has sway over parts of Afghanistan. The fact that Russia is putting out bounties on the heads of NATO soldiers and contractors is absolutely abhorrent. And this was a known issue. This is a known issue that has been going on for a while. But the fact that Trump has known about it and is in the midst of continually trying to reward Russia despite this activity going on is a sign of what a sad position the US is now in. From my perspective, this is an absolute betrayal of everyone who fought during the past 19 years in Afghanistan. Think about this. Just absolutely think about how dare they do this. The Trump administration is literally spitting on the sacrifices of all the people who fought there since 12th of December 2001. If his so-called peace deal goes through, all the lives of NATO soldiers and the soldiers in the Afghan army who have fought to try to defend that country from the Taliban and the kind of ridiculous regime that they would like to re-implement there, their lives are wasted. From what I see in Bolton's new book in chapter 13, Trump seems to think that Afghanistan is land that somehow belongs to the Taliban. He is wrong, and he is an active threat to progress in the region.
Oh, I love the
Holy
passion
shit.
that you have there for that. I mean, this is the sort
That was
of thing
great.
That was fucking
no,
awesome.
yeah, that is wonderful. That is wonderful because we're on a platform. We're on the internet. We're on the internet where if anybody cares about this issue, for the most part, it's to say we're bad and we shouldn't be there and hashtag not our problem and hashtag their sovereignty, essentially, with the frame of reference, of course, being the Taliban, not the Afghan government.
NATO is present in that country at the invitation of the present Afghan civilian government. And there's a UN resolution that backs that as well. So I don't know why people keep referring to the Taliban as though they somehow have a legitimacy in that country. They are a collection of criminal genocidal maniacs who have been trying to murder every single ethnic minority group in that country at any point in time that they have had power. It is unreal that people seem to think that they are the ones who should have sovereignty there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it goes back to the Westphalian sympathies that so many people have, that this idea that sovereignty trumps all else, and they set the frame of reference for sovereignty as the Taliban government pre-December of 2001. That's their frame of reference. It's not the current civilian Afghan government. They view that as a manifestation of American imperialism. And it's pathetic because if that's a manifestation of American imperialism in the face of the Taliban, then I'm an American imperialist. So that's my attitude.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if they're going to call us that, they may as well just call us. I mean, it wouldn't be accurate, but I mean, they might as well just call us that. They could call you that. They might as well call me that. It would be absolutely absurd, but I mean, they could try.
Exactly. Oh, I mean, I love that we got a platform now, and we got many out here in the hot community now that are calling out the terrorist apologetics that are out there, the apologetics for the Russian state, as well as any other number of authoritarian hellholes that are out there that are a menace to their own people and a menace to our existence here in the West. And they threaten to stamp out the Enlightenment, and they will not succeed unless we lose the power of will and the moral clarity to uphold our own convictions of things such as human rights, democracy, and the idea of the liberal society in general, of accountable government, of individual rights and freedoms. That if we lose track of that and we fall into this moral degeneracy and false equivalence to say, well, we're the bad guys, we're kind of equal with the Russians, they kill people, we kill people, we will lose our civilization then. Because it's not about how much strength you have, it's about your willingness to defend yourself and promote your interests. And here we have an American leader right now who has not only no willpower to defend American interests, and of course human interests correspond most closely with American interests in the region. He simply is on their side at the end of the day, because even if he's not being paid by them, even if he's not getting direct orders from Putin, he's sympathetic to their objectives, to their Eurasianist approach, to their vision to essentially bring Eurasia under the forces of darkness into the next century and into the century in the future.
We have a wry joke that we make about that among the people who are in the, if you want to call it, the pan-Asianist community, which is that when you see Russians talking about Eurasianism, it's all Euro and no Asian.
Yeah. Oh man. We're going to go to Jaeger though, but I really appreciate the passion that you have for this specific subject here, because it's a breath of fresh air. Because if I turn on a lot of the big YouTube channels out there, it's going to be basically talking about the no good neocon ghouls and how John Bolton is an evil, blood-sucking demon who's out there to basically try to get the deep state to take Trump's power away and all this other stuff. It's gross. It comes from the populist left and the populist right, essentially. But we'll go to Jaeger now. So thanks for coming on, Jaeger.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Jaeger. Drink of choice tonight is Crown Black, straight, because you don't mix that with Coke. As far as this situation, I know Henry brought up, Trump against our allies. Our allies are also tied, especially in Europe, to Russia. As far as the oil, there needs to be a Green New Deal or something there, or Israel pipeline, or even work with a country like Azerbaijan, some way to get Europe off of Russian oil to attack them economically. Now, as far as what Trump said, it's no different than any other populist. It's a peace at all costs. They're willing to give whatever they can in order to maintain the peace. Doesn't matter if they're going to kill your troops or they're going to attack you in other ways. The goal is peace. And sometimes you have to stick up for yourself, and America should stick up for those, especially in Afghanistan, not just for the American troops there, but for the people there as well.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, so those are the opening remarks by all of our guests tonight. And definitely, I've got their links in the Chiron below. Go and check out their channels and follow them on Twitter. With this, we're going to get into essentially the subject matter at hand. And so I want to pose a question now to the panel. I mean, I think it's pretty clear, more or less, in terms of the connotations of what everybody's kind of been saying tonight and the thematics of it. But I just want to get everybody kind of, their opinion on the record here. Do you think, in your view, do you think it's more likely that Trump's inaction here and ineptitude here was a result of him just not paying attention in the briefing? Because we know he's known to not care and not pay attention and ignore what people tell him. Or do you think he knew and he didn't care? So we'll go around. We'll start with Anthony. Anthony of
Okay.
HTV.
Now, based on what I've read from Bolton's new book, and by the way, I recommend people to purchase it. However, if you want to sail the seven seas, you're more than welcome to, where you'll find the book available online or at your local, how can you say, internet or Google search. But anyway, to get right to the point, in Bolton's book, he mentions a slew of, and I think Ray will speak to this a bit later when she's talking on this. In Bolton's book, it mentions a slew of different quotations about Trump's attitude, not just to foreign policy, but to areas like Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. And from what Bolton has written, he has not only characterized perfectly Trump's attitude towards these places, but it can really be summarized as just a man who does not give a fuck about the Middle East. He wants to pull out troops from the Middle East. Like in the book, it sort of mentions a couple of briefings where Trump's in. And every single briefing, when it comes, whether it be on Iraq or Afghanistan, Trump says, when are we going to pull out the troops? He's completely disregarding the intelligence to the contrary that says, okay, we should maybe keep our troops there to not only safeguard to safeguard the people of Afghanistan, but also to safeguard the soldiers of that we are using to fight in Afghanistan. And you can see this disregard for all these lies, because Trump really views it as, okay, how much money are we spending in Afghanistan? Oh, that's a lot of money. Well, why don't we pull out our troops? Why don't we take this money back and not give a shit really about the Middle East? So from my personal view, when it comes to these recent developments, which by the way are not really old or not really too surprising if you have been following the sort of the intelligence, where Russian special operations forces are already helping the Taliban and even Al-Qaeda as well. And they've been doing so for quite some time as a means to undermine American presence in the country, really. If you've been following this, you will know that this is not really a surprising development regarding Russia. It actually kind of confirms what everyone really suspected, especially in the intelligence community, especially in the analyst community, what we expected of Russia. However, what is really surprising is that Trump's lack of care for it, because Trump already has said, he mentions in the book, that he would rather have Russia and Iran essentially do the heavy lifting when it comes to fighting terrorism, rather than America itself fighting terrorism. And repeatedly, as I've mentioned before, he says in every single briefing, he cuts it short, he interrupts, he's quite disrespectful to generals like General Mattis. He says that, no, I don't want to keep troops here. How do we get a solution to bring these troops home? And even Pompeo, for example, who himself is a bit of a slimy sycophant for Trump, and that he was trying through his new briefings to try convince Trump of, okay, we'll keep a presence for a little bit, but we'll make sure to withdraw it over time. So to get to the heart of your question, I think that it was something that Trump knew about, but simply he did not care, because at the end of the day, he's trying to fulfill his campaign promises, which were to pull out of these quote-unquote forever wars in the Middle East. Because at the end of the day, he's doing for political power, and he's doing it for his political prestige and status amongst not only what he believes his voter base, but also to make him look as if, oh, he's the president who pulled out of the Middle East. And I honestly think that it's something that when you read the book, you actually understand the nature and character of this man, and how utterly selfish and how utterly he does not simply give a fuck about not only the world, let alone the Middle East. So that's sort of my, you could say, opinion on the matter.
Right. See, yeah, that's the thing. I will just make a note here. I'm just going to turn on the name tags here. I had that feature disabled, so we will have everybody have their name tags available momentarily. I want to go to Henry. I know, Henry, you mentioned on the stream earlier that you did that you really think that he probably does know, but I'll go to you here to expand on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, like, with what you guys have been saying, Kevin, and what Anthony had just said about his obvious motivations. I think for me, the simple, like, the thing that I see that makes it really clear about this is the way it's described in the reporting, is that it wasn't just like it was something that was told to him. They said that he was presented with a menu of options for how to respond to this by someone. So it wasn't like it was just a passing thing in a briefing. Like, they gave him options for how to respond, and he actively chose not to do any of them. So it's really tough for me to believe that this is something that just like went through his head or whatever. Like, he actively made a choice not to do anything. At least that's the way I've been hearing the reporting framed, is that they came to him and said, we could do any of these number of things in retaliation to this, and he didn't pick one. So that to me shows very clearly, if it's being reported accurately, which I have already said, I basically believe the reporting. I don't see how you could say he didn't understand it. Like, he made an active decision. It wasn't just something told to him. So, yeah, I think he understood it and made a choice.
Yeah, that's such a good point. We'll go to Anthony Roberto for your analysis on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I've read when it comes to the Taliban and Russia, is I know through like different websites, you know, like the Jamestown Foundation and Foreign Affairs and other news outlets, is that it's like they've said for a while that I believe since like the late 1990s, Russia and the Taliban have like kind of like negotiate some kind of peace, and then after mid 2000s, they started to warm relations, especially after the Chechen Wars. Um, but like since then, like they have been growing relations with each other, and if you think about it, Russia's pretty backwards, the Taliban's pretty backwards. They both hate America. They both see America and of course our NATO allies there as a thorn. So they have like those, I guess, common goals, and it's not surprising, especially a couple of years ago. I know there was a few reports that were saying that Russia was dropping off weapons at the Tajikistan border. And what they were doing is they were dropping off stuff like night vision goggles, anti-tank guns, and modernized AK-47s and whatnot to the Taliban fighters. And there's been, U.S. generals that have talked about this as being a rumor. They'd be like, hey, why do these guys have more modern, like handheld, equipment? It's like, hey, like these guys have new helmets. These guys have some new vests. So people have been saying like, well, like some of the stuff comes from Russia, and people kind of trace it back, and there's been a lot of rumors around that, and to be for the past couple of years at least, and it's not entirely surprising. I think the bigger thing is mostly Trump just not doing anything about it, and the fact that like he doesn't want Afghanistan to be a problem. He likes to just leave things. It's not even just Afghanistan, but like when it comes to other problems, he'd rather just like have someone else deal with it because he doesn't really want to confront a lot of these issues. And we see this in other places, and it's such a it's such a problem for us though, because obviously if we leave, it's going to be a huge problem, because our adversaries, not even just the Taliban, but other state actors as well, will have a lot of influence, and they will gain because we're the ones that are losing. We lose. It doesn't put America first. It puts America last, and it puts everyone else in front. And I don't think, it's obviously, a smart idea to do this, especially since now that we know that, Russia's giving them these weapons, and, Trump is like, here, we'll just give the keys to Kabul to Putin. Why not? Who cares? It's thousands of miles away. I mean, it's not like they're attacking Kansas. I mean, like that's his mindset around it. So it really is just really disturbing to see.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. Who cares? Who cares? It's outside the border. Not a problem. It's like the Russians moved troops 3 feet south of the border with Mexico. It's like, yeah, not a problem. Not a problem. After the rest of the world is conquered by them. That is the logical conclusion of isolationism, is that you do nothing until you lose the world, and then now they come for you. Now I guess we are justified to fight, but now they have the world and we have whatever we have. We're probably going to lose at that point. It's not a very smart or proactive way to go about things by any means. But I want to go back to Ray Murasame now. Just on the specific intent of this, I gather from your opening remarks that you believe that this is probably purposeful ignorance here, right?
I think it's deliberate ignorance, and I'll build a case for this. It's one of those things where you can't be 100% sure, but I think when I make this argument, you can be reasonably sure that he is doing this on purpose. So. And I mean that the ignorance is on purpose, because we know from Bolton's book that when Trump gets briefed, they stopped giving him the kind of like big boy briefings with lots of charts and diagrams, because Bolton was observing, and others were obviously observing, but Bolton is the one writing the book, so we get to see it through his eyes. He's observing that Trump continually zones out whenever he's presented with more than like 3 graphs, it would seem. Not sure why. Not sure if this is some psychological issue. Who knows what the real reason for it is? Particularly since Bolton also mentions that unlike any other president in history, Donald Trump starts his day at 11 o'clock a.m., but still ends his day at the same time that you would ordinarily do so. So it's not like Trump is on some kind of like weird flexi time thing. No, he just removes 2 hours from the beginning of his day and doesn't actually use them to do anything other than to call around to his favorite people, whoever they might happen to be, in random locations. And of course, he does this without notifying anyone as to what he's actually doing. So that happens first. Then at 11 o'clock a.m., Trump will kind of like roll in and be like, yeah, tell me what's going on. And then he will zone out if your explanation is too long. So this could lead some people to think that maybe he's not paying attention in these meetings, but then they have to dumb everything down to a level where they can actually get the impact that they want. So I'm pretty sure that when it came down to informing him that Vladimir Putin and friends and a certain GRU unit is basically paying bounties for people to assassinate NATO troops, that would have been presented to him as literally that sentence. Like, what is going on today? Well, good morning, Mr. President. GRU is actually trying to assassinate American soldiers and NATO soldiers because Russia apparently wants to collaborate with the Taliban in carrying out this activity. That would have been presented to him as like a single sentence. I am sure of it. He would have been aware of it. He's going to claim now that he doesn't remember it or that no such briefing occurred and all kinds of nonsense like this. It definitely happened. It's a countdown, I think, to people leaking that they were present when that briefing occurred. Because right now, actually, on the news cycle right now, Trump is denying that he actually remembers this briefing or that it's ever even happened.
Yeah,
we know it happened. It had to have happened. So we're going to see next in the next news cycle, which is probably going to begin around, I don't know, sometime on Sunday evening, Monday morning. You're probably going to see some people coming out saying, well, actually, Trump is lying because we were present when that briefing occurred.
Yeah.
That's going to have to happen. And then I don't know where he's going to go from there. Is he going to like finesse his way out of it by somehow appealing to his base and talking about how the war has been going on for quote unquote too long, as he would phrase it? But even then, Bolton's book humiliates and embarrasses him then too, because there's a paragraph in the book in which Bolton describes Trump as saying that he would like to withdraw and get down to zero in Afghanistan by quote October 2020, because that would be advantageous for him in an election. So he's running an entire war in Central Asia on the basis of what he thinks might get him elected in November 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff where if any other president had done this, it would have been the biggest scandal in pretty much history. Like, can you imagine if Obama actually did that?
Oh yeah, I mean, he wore a tan suit and it triggered half of Fox News. Can you imagine Obama was working
people are
with
making jokes about that now, that basically if this isn't enough, you're going to have to put Trump in a tan suit in order to make it somehow worse.
I mean, it's just incredible, the sense that we can be living in a world where the American president cannot care that there are bounties placed on U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan by America's preeminent rival. And this is going to get into the next topic that I'm going to put to the panel after we hear from Jaeger.
I just want to quickly get back in there for one more thing as well on him not caring about human life. I was reading through Bolton's book today, and I just want to quote from just one paragraph from that book, which is a very short paragraph, so hopefully I will not be going on for too long. But if you jump to page 385, there's actually a section in which Trump appears not to care about the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. So I'll just read this paragraph, and you will be baffled by this. All of you will be baffled, I'm sure. Quote, Dunford further explained the need to maintain a counterterrorism presence for the broader region. He's referring to Afghanistan here. As he launched into his charts and slides to show how our ongoing Afghan operations would be staffed and costed, Trump said, quote, there are still a lot of people there. But fortunately, he went on to say, having no one is dangerous because they, the terrorists, tend to form there and knock down buildings, which is exactly the point. Trump repeated one of his hobby horses, namely that it was cheaper to rebuild the World Trade Center than fight in Afghanistan, inconveniently ignoring the loss of life in the 9/11 attacks, not just the cost of rebuilding. It also ignored the reality that a Trump withdrawal followed by a terrorist attack would be devastating politically. Dunford pressed on, saying that our military pressure kept the terrorists from reconstituting, almost like an insurance policy. He had no precise timetable in mind, but the Pentagon would allow the diplomatic reconciliation process to set the timing. I thought we were approaching dangerous ground here, again opening the question of whether we should be in Afghanistan at all. The discussion meandered around for a while, with Trump asking me why we were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan but not Venezuela, which at least showed everyone else in the room what he really wanted to do, end quote. This actually features several times in the book in which John Bolton seems to have question marks over his head, because each time the subject of Afghanistan is presented to Trump, he starts whining about how he would rather have all of those assets in Venezuela. For what reason? this seems to be completely ridiculous to me because, I mean, I hate to put it as bluntly as this, Venezuela seems quite adept at defeating itself and probably does not need the United States to help it on that path.
Holy shit.
Oh, man.
So he's saying it would be cheaper for us just to capitulate and do nothing rather than like fight our enemies and resist.
Hey, man, it was cheaper to rebuild Pearl Harbor than spend all that money
Yeah.
to build the nukes, man.
Well, if we just
rebuild
capitulate
Pearl Harbor, man.
our enemies, it'd be cheaper and less costly than
Cheaper.
fighting.
Yeah, I
No,
just want
that is possibly one of the dumbest takes on international affairs from
It's fucking
any
immoral.
person
Yeah,
of
this-
any political spectrum, and I'm including brainlets on Twitter here when I say that. And this is the American president.
This book contains multiple instances of Trump making that take.
I mean, there's at one point he even says, "Why I don't like." Actually, can I read this to you? If we're just on the topic of just reading a fraction, I'm sorry, Yag, if I'm going to be cutting in a bit, but I just want to read just a bit of this. So, basically, Trump's talking about NATO and Warsaw, and okay, so this is during a briefing, okay, and Afghanistan happens to be mentioned. So this is Bolton. On Friday evening, Warsaw time, August 30th, I participated from Warsaw via video conference in an NSC meeting on Afghanistan with Trump and most others in the sit room. As I've described, so consuming was the Afghanistan discussion that Trump was leaving the room before I realized the meeting was breaking up. I all but yelled at the screen, "Wait, what about Ukraine?" And everyone sat back down. Trump said, "I don't give a shit about NATO. I'm ready to say, if you don't pay, we don't defend them. I want the $300 million," he meant $250 million, one piece of the assistance earmarked for Ukraine, "to be paid through NATO." Of course, none of that was physically possible, reflecting Trump's continued lack of understanding of what these funds were and how they came to be earmarked. But there was nothing new there. Ukraine is a war between us and Russia, he said, meaning, I think, a barrier to closer Moscow-Washington relations. He then said to Pence, "Call NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg and have him have NATO pay. Say the president is for you, but the money should come from NATO," which still didn't make any sense. "Wait until the NATO meeting in December," Trump said, implying, at least in my mind, that he was going to announce we were withdrawing. But that's just one example, and there's tons of this, and Ray can even attest to this. There's tons of instances where Trump clearly does not give a fuck about the briefing that's going on, nor necessarily the cost to human life, nor the wider international relations.
Up to four times in this book, Trump asserts that Afghanistan somehow magically belongs to the Taliban. Up to 4 times in this book, he asserts this.
What a disgrace. What a disgrace. That goes back to what I was talking about the Westphalian worship of the altar of sovereignty, sovereignty, bro, and how it always so happens that the sovereignty, the frame of reference of that sovereignty is always Russia's sphere of influence. It's always the Taliban. It's never...
I was actually talking to someone on Twitter just yesterday who did that exact thing you just described, where this whole conversation was being had on Twitter, and the person responded saying, in response to the bounty story, this was a Trump supporter who was responding in response to the bounty story, who said that in his viewpoint, this is what happens when you enter into the sphere of the Russian bear. And I was just thinking, are you serious? So, like, since when is the sphere of the Russian bear like in the middle of Central Asia?
Well, I
always feel like for these guys, the sphere of the Russian bear reaches right up to the border between the United States and Mexico, and right up to the border between Canada and the United States. Like literally anything that's outside of the United States is suddenly somehow magically Russia's territory.
No, that's correct. And if we're being honest with it, a lot of these people would rather that they just came in and quote unquote liberated America. In other words, they view the world as the sphere of the Kremlin, and they live in this unbelievably divorced from reality narrative and bubble in which somehow Putin and Russia is the bastion of everything great and righteous. And of course, to them, they'll usually have appeals to Christendom, even though Russia, the only people with few exceptions that are actually religious there are Muslim. They have, I believe it's the highest percentage of Muslims in Europe, way higher than Germany and France combined. You know, despite their their narrative about Merkel and Macron as being, quote unquote, cut to Muslims. It's like, okay, but Putin
Also, they
literally has
conveniently
entire
forget.
territories that
They
are
also
governed.
conveniently forget that it was Medvedev who directed the FSB to do that undermining operation in the border between Russia and Finland, was it? Where it was discovered that the FSB was literally assisting illegal migrants through Finland with the hopes that they would land in Central Europe, like pretty much on top of Germany. So, like, I don't understand how these, like, Putin stands managed to, on the one hand, claim that, like, Germany is populated by cuckolds or something, but on the other hand, Dmitry Medvedev deliberately attempting to increase the level of migration into Germany somehow isn't a stain on Russia.
Well, Putin, or not Putin, but Bolton, the hawk, he has also talked about how Donald Trump didn't understand that Finland wasn't a part of Russia.
Oh
so
my God.
That
part I hadn't even noticed. That's incredible.
Holy crap.
That's another point. That's another point. I don't want to get distracted by a bunch of stuff, but we're going to give Jaeger his time to speak now, because he was the last in line.
So Finland's not a part of Russia? So
not yet.
It's only a matter of time. So, but like Trump, he is like narcissistic to no end. Like, he would get told something like, oh, well, the Taliban's doing this and that. He's like, well, no, I said endless war, so let's end the wars. Like, so I think he was actually told this, but he didn't care. Kind of what Anthony was pointing out. He didn't care. He didn't give a shit. It's like, I said endless wars. Let's do endless wars. I have an election coming up. I want my legacy to be the Donald Trump legacy. I want them to name the White House after Donald Trump. Everything's got to have Trump on it because Trump is awesome. Everybody else is not awesome, but Trump is awesome. And so that's what I see this is all about. It's just about his reelection. It's about him as a person, and he can care less about anybody else in the world. The world revolves around Donald Trump and the people he cares about normally in his inner family circle. Everybody else is expendable.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I've just got a couple bullet points here. This is from Forbes, just to cover, some other highlights from Bolton's revelations here. So essentially, Bolton tells us that Trump asked his former chief of staff if Finland is part of Russia, which is, wow. And then he also asked if the United Kingdom had nukes. That's another one. That's a goodie. So, because I would have thought that was pretty common knowledge that the UK had nukes, but I guess the American president didn't know it.
That is truly incredible. Like, I mean, if you ask, if you ask like a 12-year-old child in like any random country in Western Europe or East Asia for that matter, does the United Kingdom operate a system of submarines from which nuclear weapons can be launched? Everyone would tell you yes. It's called Trident. This is incredible. The US president does not know that.
I'm sure Trump would be like, isn't that the thing that like Aquaman has or something? Like that would be his answer.
Aquaman system.
No, I'm just saying, like, he doesn't know. He's incurious. He's been incurious his entire life. But we're going to move on to the next segment of this now.
The one thing I was going to say is that it's weird. The whole Finland thing, that's kind of strange to me. It's kind of weird that he would, like, him assuming that's part of Russia. It strikes me as weird because that was something I've heard from, interpretations of Dugin's books where he's talking about like Finlandization, where they essentially want, like, they talk about having influence over Finland to the point where they can't like resist their will in any way. And he talks about like the Finlandization of like the entire Eurasian continent. And so just like, it's weird that that's something that would be a point of confusion for Trump. Like, I don't know why that just like blew into my brain. It seems like a weird, because like, who the fuck would have thought Finland was part of Russia? I don't know how that thought could get into someone's brain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in fairness to Trump, he thinks Venezuela is a part of Russia, basically. So, it's not like he's going to take the Monroe Doctrine seriously or anything like that. But we're going to move on to the next segment of the stream here, and I'm going to mix things up. We're going to start with Jaeger this time. So we are going to essentially be talking about, well, my view on this is that What I find perhaps the most disappointing in all of this is that we're still in a partisan era. Now, I understand that partisanship goes both ways, and I've talked about this on Twitter too, how, only about 6% of Democrats supported Trump killing Soleimani, whereas if Obama did it, it would have been almost 100%. So obviously the partisanship is ridiculous on both sides. However, we're talking about Trump tonight, and there are Republicans out there now that are still supporting Donald Trump despite these revelations. Some of them will rationalize it or dismiss it as fake news or whatever. Others are going to go further and say, well, yeah, he might have said that, but that was based and red pilled or whatever. And so I want to go around the panel and just, is there anything that's going to move about 35% his base or so here? Because if anything, you would think it would be being okay with people putting bounties on U.S. soldiers, that would probably be a red line. But, time will tell. I don't think it's going to be a red line. I think that a lot of these people have become sympathetic to Russia now. But we'll start with Jaeger. What do you make of this? Do you think that there's really anything like this that can happen that will jolt a decent percentage of Republicans out of the Trump bubble here? Because, we have the Lincoln Project where they're disillusioned Republicans and former Republicans that have had enough, and they want no part in what Trump has done to the Republican Party. But there are a lot of average Republican voters out there that are still in Trump's court, despite all of the information that's come out to indicate that he's not playing for America's side, he's playing for their side, so the Russians. So we'll start with Jaeger.
So first thing, Trump owns the libs. So that is very popular on the conservative thing. He owns the libs. He talks out against the libs. The second thing is Trump is at least at some level for not having abortions. And that is a huge thing, especially among conservative women. And then Trump, even though he's done a lot more gun control than I would prefer, is still going to be better than some of the rhetoric coming out of the Biden camp. And so just going through like these issues, foreign policy is going to fall down a little bit further because Tucker Carlson's show is one of the most popular on TV, and a lot of people watch it. And I think Tulsi Gabbard's the only person more anti-war than Tucker Carlson. So they're going to find a way to spin this. They're going to find a way to justify it. But as long as Trump doesn't touch abortion, he's going to win the conservative women vote because abortion's one of those make or break issues. And as long as he didn't touch guns, he'll probably get this conservative men vote. Like this foreign policy thing for most conservative voters, they would probably prefer a more aggressive policy, but it's less down the line as far as priorities of what they're looking to vote for.
Yeah, no, that's a good assessment. And I like the point that you noted there to kind of conclude with, which is that they would probably prefer a more patriotic sort of foreign policy that's more in America's interest because they voted for Bush, they voted for Reagan, they voted for HW. They would have been supporting the Iraq War and criticizing people that were against it 10, 15 years ago. But now that Trump's there, now they have to change their tune. Basically, I just find it disappointing that principles don't really have a place for such a large percent of the population. And now I'm not just talking about Republicans here. If you're one of those Democrats that said, oh, it was bad that Trump killed Soleimani, you said it was good that Obama killed bin Laden. So, the partisanship goes both ways there. So,
well, they're all weighted. So each issue is going to be weighted, especially on the individual level. Each individual is going to weight different issues. But generally, from what I see living in a pretty conservative area, is like abortion is the make or break issue for conservative women. Depending on what side you were on, it's going to be the make or break issue. If you're going to come out straight up against abortion, having abortion up to the point of birth, like conservative women are going to vote against you. And then guns for conservative men, like if you're going to do any form of gun control, those are going to be the two primary issues. And then taxes, I think, would probably end up third. And then foreign policy would be fourth, along with some other issues. But yeah, abortion, guns, and taxes. Like if you're at least decent on those three, you're going to win these votes despite the foreign policy aspect and the fight, despite the fact that Trump's really betraying America with his actions here. they will forgive it as long as he supports those key issues that they care more about. So everything's weighted. So it's kind of like a weighted average. So they're going to weigh things and then make an assessment on where the politicians fall on those things.
Oh yeah, it's just I remember the Bush era when Republican voters would have signs and banners on their cars and lawns that would say support the troops, that kind of stuff. If you're going to vote for Trump in 2020, you can't go and put a support the troops thing on the lawn when Nikki Haley becomes president, because a lot of them will probably do that if a war with Iran starts under a hawkish president down the road. They'll jump on that bandwagon because they'll follow the leader. But let's keep it real. I mean, I know that the abortion thing is really charged. It's got this high degree of valence on their end. But, it is always interesting to point out. It's like, so unborn fetus lives matter more than American troops' lives? And they would say, yeah, like unironically, they'd say, yeah. At this point.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I thought that American troops were supposed to be the bravest and the most valuable lives in the country. One's risking everything so that you can live your life. So
you would find that among conservative men, but from conservative women, like abortion is their top issue.
Yeah,
so like killing babies. It doesn't matter what's going on in the rest of the world. Like killing babies to them is their number one priority. They want to stop people from killing babies.
Huh. Well, with that, we're going to go to Ray Mursame. So.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with Jaeger. It's dumb as hell. I mean, the GOP stance is so incoherent. I mean, if you were to actually vocalize the whole thing out, it becomes immediately obvious as to how incoherent it is, and yet it will probably still be as it is. So, I mean, think about it this way. GOP voters at this point seem to be okay with literally letting Russia place bounties on their own sons and daughters' heads so as to own the libs, but they're also paradoxically claiming to be pro-life somehow. And it's almost like it's so long as it feels like it's about winning, it doesn't matter if the bounty's on your daughter's head or something, because abortion, it's very bizarre. And then, of course, you've got this is going to be like a single data point. It's like a weird data point, I know, but you need to extrapolate something from it. A lot of people after 2016 were insulting me because of the Russia thing, or were referring to me as Russophobic, or what's this other term that they like to use? Nazi and Asian supremacist. That was another one I was called a lot for criticizing Vladimir Putin. Apparently, criticizing Vladimir Putin makes you an Asian supremacist now. So. A lot of the people who had said this, I was like, okay, we had these debates. How about we invite them for a round two now that this astonishing information has come out this week? Not a single one of these individuals who were very loud in condemning me back in that time period will now speak to me on that issue. So this means that, in my interpretation, this means that they understand the gravity of the issue. They're unwilling to engage with it, and they're basically going to treat it like how they try to treat COVID-19, which is that if they cover their eyes and just don't do testing, then it won't be seen. Similarly, with this with this Taliban issue, if they just pretend that the bounties don't exist, then maybe they will go away. That's what they must be thinking on this. There's also the issue of conservative judges, which again is incoherent, because if they think that conservative judges are supposed to be there for the sole purpose of endorsing making their bigoted opinions into laws when they ask them to, then how do they explain Gorsuch from 2 weeks ago not doing that thing when they asked him to? So none of this makes any sense. On the issue of abortion, on the issue of judges, on the issue of do they care about the military. So I just have a feeling that it's all about their feeling that they would like to own the libs. Also, I think that that there may be a negative effect created by the people who created Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone and stuff like this, and the Black Lives Matter protests and how some of that got violently out of control. There are a lot of voters who are probably GOP voters who are going to go into the booth thinking some bizarre thing like the absurd claim, which I'm seeing increasingly on Twitter, where they're alleging that Joseph Biden somehow simultaneously is in control of Antifa, but also at the same time is a puppet of Antifa. So I don't know how he can be in control and a puppet of a thing at the same time. But there's a lot of GOP confused thinking. And when you sort of meld it all together and roll the whole ball of nonsense together, it just equates itself to just being more votes for Trump. So they might still be able to actually pull the lever for Trump, despite the fact that Trump is okay with Russia putting bounties on their children's heads. I mean, It's sad, but they are literally stupid at this point. I mean, I've been what's the word for it? I have been tactful for years on basically not want to actually call Trump voters stupid. But now at this point, if they can't actually condemn this thing when there are literally bounties on their sons and daughters' heads in uniform, I don't know what to say other than they must be stupid to not actually be mad about that.
Yeah. I mean, there of course was that picture from, it must have been a couple years ago now, but it was these two guys at a Trump rally and they had shirts. It was the same shirt. It wasn't homemade or anything. You can buy these shirts on Amazon. You can go out right now and buy this shirt on Amazon. It said, "I'd rather be a Russian than Democrat." And I'm like,
what the
these
hell?
guys, and they had the MAGA 20, what was it, like MAGA 2020 or whatever hats, MAGA 2016 hats. And I'm like, man, how the mighty have fallen. This used to be the party of Ronald Reagan. He's using Reagan's slogan. And I'm just imagining Reagan right now being like, you know, because he would tell jokes about like life in the Soviet Union and how much it sucked and everything. And he would go over there and say, you know, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And Mr. Gorbachev would say, yes, sir. And now we got a Republican leader that when he goes over there to Finland, which he thinks is part of Russia, Putin says to him, well, you trust the KGB over the CIA, right? Don't you, Donnie? Be a good boy. And Donald Trump says, yes, sir. How the mighty have fallen. This used to be a very hawkish party that was like pilled on foreign policy. And now it's a joke. So
also, there was a weird thing. That, believe it or not, on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow talked about this issue in, I think it was late 2015. So I don't know if she could have known how right she was going to be, where she speculated that there was something definitely weird going on among Republican circles, because I think it was Pew. I can't remember because I actually don't have the file on hand. But basically, it may have been the Pew poll. I can't remember whether it was, so like, don't quote me on that. But it was some kind of reputable poll where someone asked, you know, to Republicans, like, who do you respect more as a president for the United States? And like, there were several answers, and obviously one of them was Barack Obama because he was actually the president at the time. And then for like a curveball effect, they also included the name Vladimir Putin on the list to see what would happen. And I think it was something like, I can't remember the exact number. Was it like 36% of Republicans actually ticked the Vladimir Putin box in 2015? So that was truly shocking. And then she basically went on the news that night for her Rachel Maddow show thing and came up with a hypothesis for how this particular poll result could have occurred. And her theory on this was that the Russian Federation was actually seeding its personnel, particularly cultural activists, if you like, into groups like the Family Research Council and other socially conservative groups, and were essentially burnishing Russia's, let's say, social conservative record, which is obviously selectively plucked there because, I mean, ordinarily, it's hard to actually burnish Russia's social conservative record as opposed to just rhetoric, because of the fact that obviously Russia has like high rates of drug use, high rates of HIV, high rates of divorce, high rates
abortions.
of abortion and so on. So what you have to do is obviously you have to ignore those things and actually just go with the rhetoric that that their churches and their political figures are pumping out. And those things were then inserted into American conservative organizations and then reparroted by essentially stupid idiots. And then it was absorbed by the voters, and then they regurgitated this on the poll. So that was her theory as to how this had occurred. So at the time, everyone was like, well, there's no way to actually prove this, unfortunately, because you can't get inside the heads of these voters and be like, okay, why are you thinking this way? After a couple of years of seeing this stuff playing out, though, I'm kind of feeling like she was right. Like many of these guys who are wearing these Russia shirts, like the ones you were describing, I always get the feeling that these guys are trying to live vicariously through Putin because they have failed at life in some way that we don't know about. Could even be personal relationship stuff. And then when they look at Putin, they see a guy that they think is successful. Because
I know
dating
exactly.
a gymnast, and he's in strong control of a country, and he walks around with the cool, like, Putin walk and all of that stuff. Yeah. They kind of find that to be, I don't know what the word for it is.
No, I know.
Well,
they feel it to be based and red-pilled. I know the two main areas that they failed in tremendously. One, they haven't gotten laid in a long time, or they never gotten laid. And second is they work like minimum wage jobs, or they don't even have a job. And the overlap between those two groups is massive. And they're on 4chan, and they're out there. They're, you know, are the Donald, all this kind of stuff. And they see Putin, and they're like, oh, well, he gets laid, and he's robbing $1 trillion+ from the country. He's badass. He, Jesus is with him and all this stuff, even though they're like atheists and stuff. Like a lot of the rhetoric that's out there is coming from atheists that want a state religion because they think that it would curb degeneracy and make it easier to gain power.
Of control. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing that I think is really interesting and point out here, I had a guy try to tell me earlier just today that Russia and America are equally Christian. And I was like, dude, I have the few poll. Russia, only about 3% of Russians attend church once a month or more, whereas in America, it's over 35%. So America is already like more than 10 times, as many people that actually go to church. And the second is the only group in Russia that actually in any way is significantly actively religious is the Muslim community, which is huge. It's like 15% of the country, massive. It dwarfs Germany, France, all these other areas. And most of Russians, they basically, a lot of them are either atheist or they don't really think about it very much. And yes, they'll wear the Orthodox cross. You'll see, like, if you look at Russian models on Instagram and stuff, they'll be like very scantily clad and they'll have like a Russian Orthodox
and that Russian cross will still be there,
like from their necklace. And you're like, yeah, that doesn't really look too Christian. It's like, I remember taking a Russian class, like not a Russian language class, but just on the history of modern Russia. And I asked my professor about that. And she basically said, she's like, oh yeah, it's a symbol of ethnic solidarity. It doesn't have any religious connotations to that.
Exactly.
Like, and these gullible idiots look at that and they're like, oh, they must be deeply faithful or whatever. And it's like, one, those people over there, they're basically atheists. And two, almost all these alt-right guys are also atheists. It's such a cluster. It's such a cluster crap. So
also, even in terms of like the personal appearance of Vladimir Putin, where they kind of like worship that appearance of his, the incoherency still manifests even there also, because of the fact that how do they get from claiming that Putin is the kind of human being which they would want to be led by, which in itself is bad, obviously. And then they look at Donald J. Trump, and he's kind of like the same kind of individual, except not fit in any way, and he's essentially a lard bucket. I hate to actually say it, but he is a lard bucket, right? So they're looking at Donald Trump, and it's just like, this is ridiculous. Someone has actually made a meme about this. I think it's called the what was it? Putin Walk and Friends. And it has basically Vladimir Putin doing his like, blatantly KGB walk, because the reason that Vladimir Putin has this walk, by the way, is because it's the kind of walk you would have if you wanted your right hand, to have the shortest distance to reach to pull a pistol. You would walk in that way, because obviously when you want to reach for it, it's literally right there because your hand is always in the correct position. So it kind of looks weird when you walk, but it's practical. Right? Now, if you look at Donald Trump when he walks and you slow it down and you kind of like stretch the screen a bit, like how the meme did, then Donald Trump doesn't have a walk. He has like a waddle kind of like maneuver that he does. And I don't understand how these guys who are like into this tough guy scenario, whatever, are also simultaneously looking at Trump and thinking that's a tough guy. How can they do that? The only way is that there's some kind of weird psychological thing going on where they're actually still seeing themselves in Trump in some bizarre way. Like, they may be that kind of person themselves, but they don't want to admit to it. So in other words, they're Vladimir Putin in their head, but in physical reality, they more resemble Trump.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, even those guys in that photo that I saw on your Twitter account where you actually tweeted out the people wearing the Russia shirt, they pretty much don't have the level of fitness that they're essentially trying to idolize either. Because both of those guys wearing those shirts are fat.
Oh, for sure. And they've got this whole thing called like the black pill or whatever. So they basically like they have this idea that like, oh, they're ugly or whatever. So they're never going to be happy and all this sort of stuff. So they just want to burn the system down. They want the West to fall. They want Putin to win. And this idea that somehow if the Russians take over, that these guys will start winning. It's like if the Russians come and take over, the first people they're going to purge
is going to be them.
Are all these guys that sold out their own country, because the Russians are like, well, how the fuck are we going to trust you? You sold out your own country when you had the freedom to be loyal. It's like
exactly.
Like
there's always a price to pay on that, because traitors are distrusted by both sides.
Well, it's the same reason.
Like in the book, if you ever read the book Dune, the science fiction novel, it was like I can't remember. It's been a long time, but there was the guy that betrayed the baron that was like taking over, and he betrayed him for this other guy. And the first thing he did with the traitor that helped him was kill him. And they're like, "Why the hell did you do that?" He's like, "Well, he was an unpredictable tool. Like he was unloyal to his own person. Even though he helped me, I can't trust him." And then he tried to convert the guy that was actually loyal to the previous guy. So,
oh man.
I mean, I'm sure that Russia has actually been known to do that as well, where they recruit assets and then literally just dispose of them when they're ready. So there is never a reward for working for Russia.
Oh no, like you can look at this. The best reward that anybody ever got for working for the Russians was Kim Philby. He sold them nuclear secrets for 30 years, gave them invaluable information during the Cold War. And when MI6 was finally on his ass and he knew it was time to get out, he fled to Moscow in the 80s. And when they gave him a drab apartment that he was under house arrest for because they viewed him with suspicion. He still got rations and stuff. But they're like, "You're not going outside, buddy, because how do we know that you're not a spy or whatever?" They're like, "Thanks for the intel. It helped us big time. But like, how do we not know that you're like a double or a triple or quadruple agent?" And so, and he got the best treatment, because if you were one of the Italian communists, one of the French communists, and you had it with the Western bourgeoisie back in the 30s and 40s, and you were going to flee to the workers' paradise and help build communism with Comrade Stalin. What did Comrade Stalin do to you when you arrived in the Soviet Union? He had you all lined up, shot, and buried in a ditch. That's what the communists got for selling out their countries. So,
the thing is also, I've got to just mention is that I think everyone knows this already. Putin runs his country along the lines of like a Chekist type state, where you have essentially, since he himself is a former KGB operative, you have this security apparatus, or like deep state, made up of former intelligence individuals that run the state in a mafioso type way. So it's a weird combination of Chekism, as it's known, in combination with this quasi pseudo, like it has this projection of it being quite religious with the Orthodox Orthodox Church, where at the same token it has support for these intelligence groups and doesn't really have an internal quote unquote religiosity. It's more like it's a weird how can I say Frankenstein monster that Russia is at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as like a system of rational cynicism, where they have decided that, okay, they understand how religion works. They understand how the application of power through that structure works. They understand how to, operate strange gray money transfers through mafia-like organizations. They understand all of these things, and they've essentially knitted them together in the most optimal way to control large numbers of people. I mean, if you look at the way that Russia governs Ossetia, for example, that's like the model. As in their model. It's obviously horrible, but that's basically their model, where you end up with extremely wealthy people connected to the FSB controlling basically everything, as like weird semi-peasants have to grovel in the street before absolutely enormous, hulkingly fat cronies who just skim off your hard labor, the hard work that you've done, and profit from things they haven't actually done. Like they create nothing, they own. Right. So
I do want to go to
the model, and I don't understand why. Well, I do understand in a way because we've just discussed it, but you know what I mean. Rhetorically speaking, I don't understand why it is that there are people in the Republican Party who seem to think that model is somehow like laudable. There's nothing laudable about it.
I want to go to Anthony Roberto though, because it's been a while since he's spoken. So if you're there, Anthony, feel free. You got the floor now.
Yeah. Like I guess, like as we're talking about the GOP, I think especially since 2015 or maybe even like a little before, so like it's definitely become a lot more right-wing populist, which has definitely been a pretty big problem, about moving further to the right, and the fact that like a lot of candidates too, I mean even for like some even local elections too, are kind of a bit spotty the way they talk. In some states, so you can definitely see how there's been a rise of that, and that's been a problem though too, especially since the rise of nativism in America. So it's like a lot of the parties looking more inward though, so that they're not really seeing, I guess, things on the international level as much anymore. And with that, you're going to get a lot of very clownish takes from people, especially since, people like, uh, Tucker Carlson, he has become one of the, top trending Republican kind of pundits out there. He got like over like 5 million views or something like that, like within like every week or whatever. So he's definitely pulling in the numbers, and he's the largest special show on, cable TV, and that's been a problem. And guess what? What does he have? Very isolationist takes. Someone that probably doesn't care anything about Afghanistan or efforts really anywhere in the world. So with that in mind, and with those people rising up, you're going to definitely get more weirder and weirder takes. And the fact that Trump actually gets advice from this guy, which is really dumb to begin with. It doesn't like, I guess, like surprise me as much anymore, but I'm definitely kind of afraid of where the party could be going. I've personally switched to Democrat like 2 years ago, because of seeing this. And I think the bigger thing too, I think, to your original point about would Trump's base really care about this whole incident? Not really. I think as far as like the larger Republican Party goes, not as much. I think for more like wealthier Republicans that talk more about foreign policy, that are maybe more like center right in some states, in certain like factions, yes, they will. They will care about this, but I think like the broader kind of base, especially from like blue collar workers, they don't give two shits about Afghanistan. And it sucks, it is what it is. But I think more factions than not don't care about it within the Republican Party. So it's not going to really win. I mean, honestly, like if he pulled out of Afghanistan, he would get more support. I mean, a lot of his base doesn't really care about it. So it's really interesting to see that. And I find it funny too, because it's like everyone was so paranoid about Obama leaving Afghanistan. It's actually Trump that's doing that bidding. So I actually find that kind of ironic, seeing that coming out of Trump. And yeah, I mean, I think especially as isolationism becomes bigger and bigger in America, we're going to see this. I think the other thing too is, well, when it comes to the Republican Party, is that it's like now, especially after COVID, a lot of it's more centered around, domestic issues. So again, like immigration's a big thing. You talk about Charlie Kirk, the whole visa program and whatnot. They want to limit immigration, especially from like non-white people, because like a lot of it's still kind of racist. And they're gonna be looking at more economic issues and stuff like that on the home front. So I see that going forward. I also see, some level of economic nationalism coming out of the Republican Party. I've heard some stuff before that's, it's a little bit yikesy. I think the other thing too is that again, it's for several years, we've been in Afghanistan, and it's just like the Republican Party doesn't really want to just take that position as much anymore, and I don't know, like it's like I guess like what Ray said, it's kind of inconsistent how they think, So I mean, outside of Bill Kristol types, I mean, like no one really cares about this issue.
Yeah, well, Bill Kristol's based, so
Right.
big ups to Bill Kristol. So
No,
the voice of
exactly.
reason in the Republican Party, and
Yeah,
of
he's
course,
been putting out a lot of good takes recently. Well, for quite a while, actually.
oh yeah, no, I love his show. Everybody should go and subscribe to Conversations with Bill Kristol. It's a great program. So
Mhm.
he's up to 15,000 subs now, so that's cool. So yeah, we're gonna go to Henry. You haven't spoken in a while, so we'll give Henry the chance to speak.
Oh yeah, about the well, I don't even remember the original question exactly, but I think the general idea is like I don't know what's going to happen in the next election if Trump's base is going to turn out. I don't know if he's going to win or Biden, but I think to speak to what Anthony was just saying, Anthony Roberto, it's almost like what I'm more concerned about is what the next election after this one is going to look like, who the next person to follow Trump on the right is going to be. And I know also the other Anthony, he said in the Twitter chat earlier, we're talking about like, thank God Trump is stupid. imagine like someone, and I think this is coming up, it could be a possibility, where you have someone that generally has this sort of right-wing populist platform. Maybe they're even a little bit more socially, or not socially, more like socially conservative, but more economically left wing in certain ways, and populist. And they come up and they're articulating the points that Trump tries to, that Trump basically parrots from people that are honestly smarter than him, like from people that he hears on Fox News or other commentators that he generally agrees with, and that like he agrees in the same way that like the guys out in the trailer parks agree with it, and they hear it and they hear the simplistic version. But it's worrying that you might get someone who basically believes those same things and can articulate them in a much smarter fashion, in a more politically like savvy and tactful fashion, and get them actually implemented and actually get the things he's trying to do done, and be like far more effective and more extreme. And I think that's down the road, because like Trump was successful doing this just based on his like idiotic understanding of their right-wing populist platform. And he was able to like just bumble his way into victory. And I think you could have someone rise up, a much younger person too, younger, better looking, more well-spoken, who comes into this and is like an actual real threat. I mean, not that Trump is like not a threat or not bad, but that's almost more terrifying. So like the next election, I honestly don't know what's going to happen. I hope Biden wins, but like there's so much going on right now that it's so up in the air. Like there's like there's some points against Biden. Obviously, people are not enthused or happy about him. Really, it's the best things about Biden is that he's not Trump, honestly. And then with Trump, it's like, I don't know, his base is probably suffering right now economically because of all of the pandemic stuff. And then like this story we've been talking about tonight doesn't look good from any American's perspective. So I don't know. I guess that's my take on that. And I don't know if that was even a response to the original question posed. So.
Oh, no, it's good. It's good. I appreciate the analysis and everything. And so we are coming up on the 90-minute mark. And so I do want to wrap up the stream now. We've covered the issue at hand of Trump essentially ignoring and not caring about the bounties placed on American soldiers' heads in Afghanistan. But I want to give everybody the ability to make their closing remarks. And so we'll go around. We'll start with Anthony Avistu-Bisson and then go clockwise.
Okay. I didn't get to answer the last question, but
oh yeah, no, we'll give you.
You skipped it, man. You skipped right over him.
I just like it was like, well, anyway, no, it's fine.
But it's the Land of Down Under.
Yeah,
you're down under everybody else.
Yeah, okay. But the thing is that, okay, so just to address the previous question and also to close up, I guess, I honestly think that when it comes to trying to sway Trump's sycophantic base, I think it's a lost cause. I think the people who are voting for Trump at the moment are convinced and are unlikely to be swayed, because as mentioned by most of the panel here tonight, they have different issues that they're focusing on. And already the people who gave a shit about foreign policy are long gone. Like, they are long gone. They are the disillusioned, either in the Lincoln Project or they are voting Democrat right now. But the people who genuinely gave a shit about foreign policy, they are long gone from the sort of the support base. What remains now are the sycophants, the people who are using Trump's base to sort of further their own careers. Cough, cough, Mike Pompeo. And you have all these other individuals who are essentially either already swayed by Trump, who are either ignorant or stupid, as Ray has put it, or who are, as I said before, just are using sort of Trump's aura essentially for their own political gain, or that. So I think that when it comes to this election coming up, I think people actually underestimate that there's still the big issue of healthcare. There's still the big issue of the failure of Trump to respond to this coronavirus outbreak in his own country, the rising death toll that will definitely be they'll definitely play a part into this assessment of whether or not Biden or Trump can be successful. But I do think that despite everything that I'm seeing, I think the odds are stacked against Trump. And I actually believe that Biden may have actually a chance to win this election, just basically based on all the past that has happened. And I also think that as for the GOP itself, I also have to agree with Henry as well, because I'm more afraid of who will come in 2024, like who will be the young person who gives into Trump's ideals, but essentially advances them to a stage where he's not only like, you could say not only stupid, but he's calculating and evil. Like I mentioned in the sort of Twitter chat that we have privately between us all, that, it's good that Trump is at least stupid and in sort of these factors. However, if you get someone who's smart and calculating, someone like, for example, replace Trump with like a Tulsi Gabbard, or just at least replace Trump's idiocy with Tulsi Gabbard with someone who's really calculated, that could be a very big problem for the US's position. But I honestly think that that Trump, I don't think may win this election. But however, I'm not going to put my full hopes, because as I said, I thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win 2016. And technically she did win the majority of votes, but she lost, of course, the Electoral College, which is what matters. This time around, I think the odds are a bit more in Biden's favor. However, again, I'm just hoping that what comes out of this in the next coming months, we see it. I'm hoping that the Lincoln Project can sway maybe a bit of the Republicans, still teetering on the people on the fence. But as I said before, I don't think that this foreign policy, despite how horrible it is and how horrible it is that American lives are being lost, that genuinely normal people are going to give a shit, unless they, of course, have family members in Afghanistan who are fighting in Afghanistan themselves. But even then, there's this weird kind of obsessive cult around Trump that has developed. And I think that's going to become much more of an issue, because the more partisan politics are becoming, the more that it's hard to breach the gap of trying to convince the other side, because the other side already they've convinced themselves that Trump is the viable candidate. And as Anthony Roberto mentioned, that it's they rather be Russian than vote Democrat, because that's how partisan at least American politics have become. It's not like the 70s or 80s where you still had some form of communication, cross communication between the aisle. Now it's become really, and it's a bit worrying, really partisan, just the number of people who are zealously in cahoots to one side over the other. I think that's a big issue. But for my closing remarks, I thank Kevin and everyone, I guess, for being here as well. And it was a good conversation. And I hope that with the coming, hopefully, Biden presidency, or at least with the next administration, there will be some form of return to normalcy or return to a strong American position in the world. Because unfortunately, at the moment, even if Biden gets into power, there's no guarantee that we'll see, quote unquote, an interventionist president. We may see a return to normalcy, but whether or not there will be a reasserting of the American position on the global stage is something completely different. And I don't know if America is actually going to return to its former glory. I think we are maybe seeing America in decline, and it's a decline, essentially, superpower, which makes me worry, because the only alternatives are Russia and China. So again, who takes the helm after America? And I honestly think that if America falls, basically, then we need proper countries, whether it be a federalized EU with a sensible leadership and a coherent foreign policy to lead the liberal world order, or someone else. But those are what's at stake. And Russia at the moment knows this. This is why Russia is helping the Taliban, is helping Al-Qaeda. It knows this. It knows America's weakening position. It wants America to get out of Afghanistan. It wants to get America out of the Middle East so it can take the place of America as the hegemon of that area. Because at the end of the day, despite Russia being a weak economic power, it still is a very calculating power that sees what's happening in America, as Putin calls it, the sort of the degeneracy and the failure of liberalism, as he calls it. And China sees this as well. China's playing the long game. They want to see whether or not the United States will fall so that they can take the global position as the global hegemon. With those at stakes, I have to say that, again, thank you for having me on. I've been Anthony Avista Bisson, writer for the Jerusalem Post, RA Magazine, and The Region. You can find me at Stoic Viper. And if you want, you can essentially find me at also my website, philosophyismagic.com. Thank you for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, Anthony. I always appreciate your commentary and analysis. I think, tonight has been a very important stream, a good stream to have here, where we've talked about one of the most important issues right now is that the president of the United States doesn't care that American soldiers are put in harm's way, paid to have a bounty on their head by the Russians. That is huge news, and yet there, of course, as we've mentioned, there will be people who are immune to any sense of rationality here, any sense of reason, any sense of decency, and will mindlessly parrot the sycophantic, apparatchik Mike Pompeo, who he recently called John Bolton a traitor in defense of Trump. Trump's talked about dropping bombs on John Bolton's head. He's talked about how he feels that John Bolton is a wacko. No, you know who's the real wacko? The dude who doesn't care that his own troops are being assassinated and getting paid by the Russians. A dude who owes money to the Russians, big money. So, again, thanks for coming on, Anthony. We're going to go to Henry next for your closing remarks.
Okay, so I guess in closing, I'll say, with regard to this story, like I fought in Afghanistan in 2012. That was under the Obama administration, I guess. And like we had our issues there with certain policies, certain restrictions, mostly on like the way we were able to engage the enemy. They were like trying to reduce any kind of collateral damage to like extreme degrees. It restricted like the way we were allowed to use certain weapons, and it definitely cost lives and certainly caused injury to a greater extent than would have otherwise been necessary. But it probably is saved or cut down on collateral damage, certainly to an extreme degree, I would say too. But I mean, that's like those sorts of like things when you're there and you're like, oh, well, you're pissed off at the administration, or not even really the administration. It was more our chain of command and other leadership. But that sort of thing, that pissed us off, like you disgruntled, or it caused, kind of lower morale. I can't even imagine like what's going through the heads of a soldier in Afghanistan now. And of course, the nature of their deployments now are probably extremely different. Like what they're doing now, the nature of the mission is totally different now. But still, I couldn't imagine being there with this news story coming out. And, it's not some quibble over like, what type, how you can like rules of engagement, essentially. It's about like you find out the president has known that your enemies are putting bounties on your heads and causing you bodily harm and death to like your friends and comrades and things. I mean, comrades may be poor choice of word. Whatever. But your brothers in arms, I suppose. But anyway, yeah, I just can't imagine that. And finding out he's done nothing about it, that would be the most demoralizing thing I think could ever happen to a person like in that situation. But yeah, I guess I'll end with that.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, Henry. And I think it's worth taking a moment to just mention, we all definitely owe you a bit of thanks for your service in Afghanistan, of course, because your service over there. I mean, the whole Western world owes our gratitude essentially to yourself, as well as the other soldiers there, Canadian, American, etc., who fought to get rid of these monsters, who provided safe passage, harbor aid to the Taliban or to Al Qaeda to do 9/11. Not to mention the complete monstrosity that they posed on a domestic level in Afghanistan. So big up to Henry. Thanks for coming on. And so
thanks for having me, man. Yeah, always a good time.
Yeah, anytime. We're going to go to Jaeger next for your closing remarks, sir.
So, Crown Black is a hell of a drink. I love it. But, you look at the situation, like, Trump only cares about number one. He only cares about himself. He'll let the Russians have whatever. He'll let the Syrians have whatever. It's about Trump. It's about Trump being reelected. And at some point, the American people got to stand up and say, no, This is about America. It's about American soldiers. It's about American people. It's about doing some good in the world rather than just letting everything be about Trump and his own little circle. So, I dislike Russia. I dislike what they've done in the Caucasians, especially Georgia. Dislike what they did in Ukraine. We should have stood up to them there. How much influence are we going to give to Russia? And then you look at Europe and how they're dependent on Russian oil. When are we going to hold these allies of ours accountable and say, you guys got to get off there? Israel just started a new pipeline. I don't like Azerbaijan, but it's better than Russia. Like, you got to get Germany specifically, but Europe off of Russian oil because that'll affect their economy and limit what Putin can do in the world. So, like, our European allies need to quit relying on Russia. We need a president who's going to be hard on Russia because Russia is going to supply our enemies with either payment or they're going to supply them with weapons. They are 100% against America. They are the enemy, and we need to do things to combat them in the world. And Trump is not the guy for that. And I think this statement, him defending the Taliban or defending Russia for paying the Taliban and killing American soldiers, is something we can use, especially in conservative communities, to persuade people and showcase this case to them and try to convince them to vote for Biden, even though they may disagree on guns. They may disagree on tax. They may disagree on abortion. But allowing our soldiers to be killed in Afghanistan is absolutely abhorrent. It's something that we must oppose. And so we got to stand up against this because it's un-American. It's not something that we should allow any president in the world. Now, Henry brought this up on the stream earlier about Trump being the worst president ever. I think Harrison is in that argument, but Trump's in the argument for worst president ever. And this only adds to the long list of things that he's done that puts him in that category. So we need to get rid of him in November. And I say this coming from somebody from Wyoming, who is the most conservative, one of the most conservative states in the union. Like, you cannot let this happen on a foreign level. You cannot let Trump do this. I'm so glad Bernie lost too, because that would be an incredibly hard judgment on the foreign policy thing. But, using something like this to convince people to say, hey, you know what? You may agree with Trump on X, Y, and Z, but this issue is absolutely abhorrent and something that you should change your vote for, because there's no way that Russia or Iran or any other country should put a price on the American soldier's head.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned right there that, you live in a very conservative state. And my hope would be that you would have not everybody, but, even a few percent of conservatives that say, now that I'm aware of this, yeah, that's a bridge too far. We're going to have to bite the bullet, vote for the other side for 4 years, get our act together on this side, get somebody who actually is going to stand up for America, and then run a campaign that isn't going to have such a deeply unfavorable as Trump has. Because, of course, one of the main factors to why he did win in 2016 was that he was deeply unpopular and he was running against somebody who was deeply unpopular. Joe Biden doesn't have that same high degree of negative favorability that Hillary Clinton had. I think that Joe Biden has a very good chance of winning. I think it's it's over 60% is my assessment, I think. And the thing is, Trump could still win, though. And if he wins, it's going to be because people rationalize this. They didn't care. They said, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not my problem, that sort of thing. And as if those lives, as if those soldiers, as if they're somehow, at fault or whatever here. I mean, let's say that you want to pull out of Afghanistan or whatever. At least there used to be a time when if you were anti-war, you would still claim to care about the troops. Well, this is saying you're anti-war and you don't care at all about the troops' lives, So, but it's amazing. It's amazing that we even have to talk about that this happened. And this happened back in March and he hasn't done anything about it. We're not saying go to war with Russia over this, but at least put them on notice. At least say this is not going to be tolerated, and there will be a severe response if this continues. If you think that this is going to fly, you'd want a president who lays down the law. But with that, we're going to go to Anthony Roberto for your closing remarks. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting stream. I mean, we talked about a couple of topics such as like Afghanistan, Trump himself, Bolton, and then a little bit about the Republican Party and the future of it. So definitely some interesting stuff. Like obviously, like we have different perspectives coming from different backgrounds, but obviously, I think most of us agree here on this panel that Trump is a bad figure, that he needs to be put out of office, and this is just another reason of the long list of reasons why he should be out. And as always, thanks for having me on, Kevin.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for coming on, Anthony. Anytime. And so with that, we're going to go to Ray Murasame for your closing remarks. So thanks for coming on, Ray.
No, it's no problem at all. I'm always happy to be invited. So, closing remarks. I mean, Trump's stances and the willingness of one out of the two political parties in the US. And I say this because I don't want to recover ground that's already been covered by the others, because obviously I agree with pretty much everything that has been said by all of those who just went before me. So I'm only going to kind of highlight the stuff that they haven't already said. So, I mean, Trump's stances and the willingness of one out of the two political parties in the US to just abscond on all and any security commitments they've made in various regions, and their inability to provide economic or monetary policy stability because of their refusal to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. I mean, these things combined together seem to mean the US is going to end up falling down the list in terms of reliability, because allies need to have reliable allies. So I don't know how the US can be considered reliable in this context. A lot of plans are made by other key countries that are based on the assumption that both US parties will at least agree on basic security commitments. In other words, when Democrats are in office, when Republicans are in office, there will be some substantive differences in some areas, but you're not going to have wholesale complete reconfiguration of foreign policy potentially every 4 years. Because how can you plan if every 4 years something completely wild might happen? So now we're in a situation, looking on from the point of view of non-American here, now it's like a 50-50 chance that you could end up with a total wackaloon in power at any given 4-year interval. Wackaloons who won't oppose Russia, won't oppose Al-Qaeda, won't oppose the Taliban, won't discipline Pakistan or Turkey, and may or may not act as 100% uncritical stenographers for Saudi Arabia's royal family, etc., etc. So I think we're going to see U.S. allies and key associate countries trying to cover their own defenses more and forming alternate pacts amongst themselves. For instance, in parts of Asia Pacific in the southeast to kind of repel Chinese advances in the South China Sea. You're going to see perhaps pacts that want to emerge in Central and Eastern Europe to try to push back against Russian encroachments, but some of these pacts may necessarily exclude informing America about the intricacies of what's going on inside of them because of the lack of trust as to whether the US president can be trusted with information about Russia. That kind of thing is going to be taking off. So I'm seeing that scenario possibly developing. Forming pacts amongst themselves to reduce dependency on the US. I mean, there may even be a loss of the United States' exorbitant privilege in terms of its reserve currency status as a result, because that exorbitant privilege comes from them also being a backer of security in key regions. If they can't be trusted in that regard, then does this have an effect on monetary policy later? Does their refusal to deal with COVID-19 and letting it just rip through the entire country, destroying jobs and entire livelihoods in its wake, what economic effect does that have in the next 4 to 8 years? How does that affect the US's standing in terms of on the world stage, right? So, because of all this, I think the situation is uncertain and the future is cloudy. It may be that, as Zbigniew Brzezinski said before his passing, the US empire is declining as it always had to, but at a rate far faster than anticipated and with a much less graceful handoff to its allies. Because I think that what people were anticipating before was that the United States would eventually scale down its role in the world as its own allies gained capabilities that eclipsed and replaced those ones. So you'd have a United States which takes a little bit of a step back and kind of, let's say, outsources its stances and commitments to other countries that are willing to take these things up on their own behalf. This is not what seems to be actually happening. It seems as though the US is basically, I hate to use this term failing, but it is. It seems to basically just be failing, and everyone's having to scramble to figure out what they need to do because it's happened so suddenly. So allies and associates seem to now have no choice but to step up and prepare to fill vacuums. And it's really disappointing because we thought we'd have a long time frame to prepare, but we have to see how it goes in November. But then also, and this is where I'll slightly disagree with what others had said earlier about the election, because while we're looking toward November, we also have to think about the November 4 years after that, since it's not beyond imagination that the GOP might try to run one of Trump's acolytes or even literally one of Trump's children in 2024 if they lose in 2020. And there's also still the factor of electoral interference to think about, which has not really been addressed since 2016, as well as pre-existing voter suppression policies that seem to work in favor of Republicans in key districts. So I think it's going to take a lot to restore the confidence in the US, and it may even already be impossible, but we don't know. I mean, the work they'd have to do is immense. And the reason I say this is because, again, just to re-emphasize this, just because Trump gets defeated in 2020, if that actually happens, does not mean that the Republican Party will suddenly reset back to what it was before. They may just put up another person who believes everything that Trump believes, but is perhaps slightly more clear-minded than Trump is. You may have Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump. Literally, one of the two of them might be the next person they try to attempt, because the fundamental problem on the ground of people in strange districts in the US believing things that they shouldn't be believing, that hasn't been solved. Those voters are still going to be energized and engaged, even if they lose in 2020. They're not just going to suddenly melt into nothing. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. It is perhaps possible that the US can restore its position and prevent this decline before it is too late to come back from it. It's just that I don't know what that would look like at this point. It would have to, there's so much work would have to be done in such a short space of time. I mean, you'd have to be literally reprogramming minds. You'd have to have cable TV news on like a 24 hours, 7 days a week basis after 2020 if Joseph Biden wins, going
It's
through
just impossible.
going through every single aspect of the Trump presidency will have to be forensically examined in the public sphere, and then the entire public of the US would need to come to terms with de-Trumpification. I don't even know how. I don't know whether that's possible. That de-Trumpification would have to happen.
That's not possible because even like we already have it now with CNN and other channels go after him, but you have the opposite. They have Fox News they can tune into, and
this is true.
Their own sources. Like everyone has their whatever your version of reality is. You can Google up imright.com and find what supports your opinion. So
yeah, so I mean the situation looks like genuinely pessimistic. So
I
mean that's pretty much my closing statement.
Thanks for bringing us all down right at the end.
Sorry.
I mean, I laid the groundwork.
So,
yeah, you too, Anthony. You're not blameless here either.
So is imright.com really a real thing?
No, it's a joke. I think
went right over my head.
Bill Burr came up with that one. Pretty sure.
Okay. New England thing.
Oh man. Well, I mean, again, thank you to all the guests for coming on. That was a great stream. We obviously we covered our thoughts on how we all feel about this. We are all in agreement here that Donald Trump's reaction to this has been completely disgusting, and I'm not going to have too much of a long sort of speech or anything here. We'll wrap this up pretty soon, but I will say that it's my hope that in the wake of everything that's happened over the last several years in terms of the Trump administration, that he will be defeated in November and that the Republican Party will wash its hands of Donald Trump, move on, and go back to a more stable and prosperous way of conducting foreign policy and other policy in the country. You can disagree on domestic issues, economics, and whatnot, but I think that everybody would agree that at a minimum, the Republican Party should move in a direction back to where it is defending U.S. interests rather than Russian interests. And that de-Trumpification process may take a long time. However, I believe that if Trump is thoroughly rebuked in November and the Republicans say, we're done with this brand of populism on his end, it was a disaster. We didn't get the wall, didn't get any of that sort of stuff done. It made everything a political issue, whereas George W. Bush was able to get stuff done without really making it a political issue and had Democrats vote for stuff. We are going to pick somebody like Marco Rubio or Nikki Haley or whatnot, and Fox News will say, you know, and this is my hope, and perhaps I'm more optimistic here, but that Tucker Carlson, despite his wide audience, will be basically asked to leave Fox because they can replace him with somebody else who will have a lot of the same talking points, but not be a total shill for Russia. And he'll also get 5 million viewers a night because it's Fox. So they could replace him with John Bolton and he'd get 5 million views, and the voters would switch their mind pretty quickly around. So that is one of the things that the Republicans have, is that they do get behind the leader. And if you get rid of a very despicable leader such as Trump and replace them with somebody normal, then you can turn things around fairly quickly. But I think what this episode showed us, though, is that there is a big segment of people that are willing to believe just about anything and rationalize and mitigate just about anything in order to save the dear leader, the image, the glory of the dear leader. And it's gross and it's disgusting. And I'm so glad to see an organization like the Lincoln Project come out and say, you know, this charge that anybody who's against Trump is like a flaming left winger or whatever, that's BS. You know, they're right wingers and they don't like what this guy is doing. And, you know, I like that. I like that they're trying to take their party back, and I hope that they're successful in that. And so to just close this out, we, you know, for a final time, to have the United States president not care that American soldiers are being assassinated and that their killers, their murderers, are being paid, compensated by the Russians. The Russians are sponsoring their assassination. That, I just want to make this very clear, 100% debunks any argument that anybody will ever tell you in the future of Russia is our friend. That is dead in the water. It's been dead in the water for a long time. But I think it takes a story like this, which is just, there's no excusing this. There's no saying, well, but actually, no, it's just, you cannot argue that they're a friend. They're an enemy. It's as simple as that. They know they're an enemy. We know that they're an enemy. Just a matter of convincing people on the fence about it. This is pretty clear-cut evidence to indicate that they are just as much an enemy today as they were in 1982 or 1971, or 1962. So this is my take on this. Thank you to everybody for watching. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so yet. You can click the link in the description and go and follow this channel over on Twitch as well. If you'd like to financially support my work here, you can go to patreon.com/superpowerbroadcasting, and definitely be sure to follow, you know, Anthony Avista-Bisson, Ray Murasame, Henry Yeager. They all have YouTube channels right now. Anthony Roberto will probably have a YouTube channel out in the near future, and we're all on Twitter, so go follow everybody on Twitter. And with that, have a good night, everybody. Thank you for watching.